today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. The alleged shooting of Charlie Kirk, one of the founders of a right-wing political group called Turning Point, has a lot of holes in the story. In today's report, we will discuss information we uncovered and reveal hidden intel that may shock you. On the anniversary of the tragic September 11th Twin Tower event that shook the world back in 2001, the deep state makes an attempt to recreate a similar event at the Washington Monument in D.C., as well as 4 other targets in the world. Pentagon generals were told to ignore the emergency messages received as the U.S. military alert system secretly goes to DEFCON One. And there has been a war going on between Source and us on the one side, and the deep state and what's left of the dark on the other, as every connection they thought they had is dying. If you have felt like you are in the middle of a tug of war, well, you're right.
Amino acids play a vital role in maintaining your overall health and well-being. Not enough amino acids and protein daily can result in brain fog, hormone imbalances, digestive issues, cognitive function, lack of energy, lower immunity, decreased muscle strength, and much more. That's why we created our amino acid complex, packed with 21 free-form, easily digestible aminos that skip the breakdown and go straight to work energizing your mind and body. Used by athletes, vegans, and high performers, New Earth's amino acid complex helps your mind and body recover, rebuild, and renew daily. Subscribe now and optimize your life.
Well, it's the 13th of September, and can't believe we're halfway through this month already. It just seems like it's flown by, and in so many ways. Part of that's because, it's like a battle with time right now. So one day seems like it's 3 days, and sometimes it seems like it flies by and you don't even know where the hours went. And it's just, it's the changing of the times in a good way, in part. But there is so much happening out there right now. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of regular news. I know that everybody's been focused on this Charlie Kirk thing, so we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive and reveal to you some intel that we have found on that case. But there are other things going on. So in Nepal this past week, there are a group of what they're calling Gen Zers who have officially overthrown the government in Nepal. Not only that, they seem to be a little bit upset over the inequality. Apparently, the job rates for young Nepalese men and women is very, very high, somewhere around 20 to 30% unemployment rate. They are struggling, and they're having to leave their home country in order to find employment. Well, at the same time, the Prime Minister's children have been posting lavish pictures of, Prada bags and lifestyle that these people have no access to. And we have a little bit of footage that we've taken from the internet on that.
I cannot believe my eyes right now. The whole of Parliament is on fire. People are dancing. None of it is left. Look at it. The whole building is burned through. People holding Nepali flags on top of the fire engines.
Interesting, isn't it? It's total chaos there right now. They are saying that a few people have gotten hurt, somewhere around 19 people, but for that many young people under the age of 25 to be out in the streets, burning the Parliament building to the ground, I guess they've had enough of their government. I know probably all of you listening to this report have too, in a lot of ways. And with what we're going to tell you about today, I'm sure you will have had enough. We don't want to have those protests, and we don't want to have that here. We don't want to give them the civil war they're looking for. And that's really where they're headed with everything that you have been seeing and hearing in the news. They've tried it several different ways. They tried it with protests against Trump. They've tried it with, color versus color and, skin versus skin. During the last Trump administration, as well as during this administration. This is not new. This also happened during the Biden administration in part as well. So it's really not a party thing here. But the operatives that run both sides are pretty crazy right now, both Democrat and Republican. During the Biden administration, we were supposed to throw away our gas stoves. I don't know if you remember that. We were also supposed to have complete and total electric cars only in California. That didn't work out either. And, just crazy laws being passed that have no hope of, making America or build back better or anything else. It just doesn't work out. So let's talk a little bit about Charlie Kirk. So I know quite a bit about the Turning Point organization. And I know quite a bit about what happened most recently. Now, I know this is going to be a touchy subject for a lot of you, and I will explain why it's so touchy. The abnormal response from people to this event, and I know there are a lot of people that have followed him quite a bit. I know he's done a lot of speaking, public speaking, but really, it's not like the Dalai Lama died, but that's what it certainly seemed like, because I was getting calls from countries all over the world, saying what a tragedy, and they were not going to work that day, and people were crying, and it was like JFK revisited. It's 1963, and this time apparently this is your guy. And he does put up a good public front. He's, family man, got kids, this is the public face. And they say that he has good factual info on both sides as to not offend anyone. And a lot of people do like him, and I understand that. But really, my introduction to Turning Point was almost a whole decade ago, and some of the people that were involved there. And I have some pretty good inside information that comes from someone that used to do some public speaking for them. But let's get back to Charlie here for a few and talk about what happened there, what really happened. So first thing that happened is there are a bunch of videos that started circulating. First, there were some videos where no blood was present. And then there was some videos where there was blood present. And some he leaned to the right, some he leaned to the left. Rings moved from one finger to another. There's all kinds of mistakes that the folks that planned this made during this operation. So let's take a look at those videos, and I have to warn you ahead of time. These are a little gruesome, and you probably have seen them online, but I must say this for anyone that might be a little sensitive to these things.
We're not counting gang violence.
So in this video, the original one, we tried to zoom in a little bit. It really didn't work out. But really, there wasn't a whole lot of blood to speak of. There were actual other videos online that have been scrubbed where he actually fell to his right, not to his left. He actually sat there for a second like he got a bee sting or something, and no blood actually came. And then once everybody figured out, well, that's odd, we better put some blood in there and scrub all the other videos and replace them. And here's what we got.
Not counting gang violence. Great. Not counting gang violence. Great. Counting or not counting gang violence. Great.
So allegedly what you're hearing is a gunshot, and then apparently he didn't bleed, and now he bled profusely. So some other interesting things that we uncovered behind the scenes. This is not on the internet. Number one, the family was issued identities 6 weeks ago, 6 weeks before the event. Both himself and his alleged wife, I say that for a reason, and the kids. Now, 20 minutes after the alleged shot happened, a private jet took off from Provo Airport, which is less than 20 minutes away from where the event was held. The tail number of that plane was N888KG, and it was hidden at the request of the owner. About 30 minutes into the flight, it dropped off all tracking completely, like the plane just vanished into thin air. Then, a little while later, it reappeared heading back to Provo. How interesting. I wonder who was on that plane, why allegedly there was no tracking, and why it disappeared, and who has the power to do that. Yeah, very interesting. Now, in addition to that, both he and his wife have very heavy ties to the CIA. So much so, Turning Point, kind of as a whole, is actually an operative recruiting ground. If you don't know much about Turning Point has been around for a little over a decade now, about 12 years, and it is a right-winged, focused political organization. They call them political activists, and they go around from college to college speaking to young adults about the Republican Party and their very conservative views. You know, there is a lot of controversy lately with Turning Point because there were a lot of people that really kind of stepped up, you know, as patriots to speak for the organization. And it turns out, according to my source, that it wasn't exactly what they were told it was. You know, they thought that they were fighting for women's rights and you know, that type of thing. They were also fighting because they also have a Christian background, and they thought that they were doing the right thing, talking about, you know, agendas, and if you're born a man and born a woman, that type of thing, definitely against the trans agenda for the most part, you know, except for Charlie, who kind of took a neutral stance and was a little bit more understanding, but basically came from the standpoint of if you're born a man, you're a man. If you're born a woman, you're a woman. I'm not saying I agree or disagree in any way, shape, or form with the views. However, recruiting soon-to-be CIA agents from colleges usually isn't quite so public, and that's exactly what Turning Point is designed to do. They're usually handed, according to my associate that did some work with Turning Point, you're handed a manifesto of students that you are supposed to target. Specifically, they fit the mold for the agencies, and those are the ones that you are supposed to recruit. And they obviously, if they are attending these events, they share the same views and are probably Republican. These young adults. So they definitely want those types of people to be recruited into the agencies. Now, the fact that they chose this person on that day doesn't surprise me, especially because of the location that this occurred. So let's talk a little bit about the events leading up to this. So shortly before, a day before the shooting, the surprise shooting, we also have this little clip from Amazon that's circulating all around the internet. Now, here is a book. It is available, if you've noticed, not just as an online book, but also as a hardcover book. Now, if anyone's ever had anything printed, from a wedding invitation to a book, you'll know how long that takes. how long it takes to find a publisher. And this person is apparently psychic and wrote the book ahead of time. Amazon also made a mistake by publishing the book on the 9th, not the 10th, which was the actual day of the event. Now, this will probably be scrubbed too, but, we were given the information, and so I just thought I'd explain it to you. Well, this was all pre-planned. There is no way this was not all pre-planned. Then when we dug and found out the new identities were there, they were supposed to be whisked away and off to somewhere else. There are reports of entering into one side of a hospital and out the other side, just disappearing. And, I've never seen a dead man walk like that. He walked pretty well, was breathing fine, the whole thing. And now his name is no longer Charlie Kirk. So that's the way I see it. There is more information about some other more sensitive talks, such as women that have come forward and been stifled by Turning Point and the Republican Party for their tendency to invite young women to after events, and they didn't seem very Christian-like to me, as opposed to what they put out in public. And some of those women claim that they were, let's just say, not in a good position, and there's possible sexual abuse that has been stifled about the organization and some of its key speakers. This comes from someone who's adamantly against that and thought that they were joining this Christian conservative movement and talking to young kids and helping shape young minds, and, some excellent speakers, this one particular person I know. And, then the truth all came out, and that person no longer spoke with the organization nor associated with them, but did continue, he's a Republican, so did continue to, talk and work with the Republican Party, and that's just, who he is. But after we talked on Monday, and I told you about Langley 5 trying to pitch themselves as being the new blood, and they should take over for the group we call the Tables, a very high-ranking group of folk on the planet as it relates to the Order of the Black Sun. They, are known to be in charge of mafia organizations, underground trading, all kinds of things, and they're a very wealthy group. But they were turned away with their proposal. Didn't really go very well. They said they'll take those things into consideration, and off they went. Well, in come the Mormons. The Mormons decided it was going to be a really great idea to partner up with Langley 5. It's not just the Mormons, it's the entire group we know as the Germanic tribes. This would be kind of a third group as opposed to the Order of the Dragon and the Order of the Black Sun. The Mormons, though, being some of the most famous. Now, this event that was held right outside of Provo, Utah, where the university was, it's about 10 minutes away, drive time from Provo. In Provo, it is a very prominent site for Mormons. There are a lot of special events that take place, and different types of things they have Mormons do within the church, different types of ceremonies. And they're kind of strange, and I just prefer not to go there as to what the ins and outs of the Mormon church. There are plenty of Mormons on YouTube and that have come out and talked about some of these events that made them feel very uncomfortable. And I probably would feel pretty uncomfortable too, to be honest with you. But one of the largest temples of the Mormons is actually in Provo, Utah. Not too far away. It's kind of weird looking, you know, there it is. And it's very, very close to Timpanogos Park and Timpanogos Mountain. Now, Timpanogos Mountain, or Mount Timpanogos, is a very interesting place, and I've been there several times as far as cleanup operations are concerned. However, you know, it's one of those places that had a lovely portal, and trust me when I tell you, they are no strangers to their neighbors down the street in that strange-looking temple that looks almost like it could be an NSA facility if it wasn't for the guy on the top of the pole there. Looks like a big antenna to me. And it looks very similar to something we saw not that long ago up in Alaska. Now, is it? No, it's not very different at all in the way that it's shaped. So underneath Mount Timpanogos is a very, very, very large secret space program base. It's come and gone. It's been wrecked a few times, and here we are again. This facility, having a portal, does have the ability and has had the ability of creating an artificial reality sophon, so an artificial photon, which can create all types of events that make them look real. At the same time, the Germanic tribes, which on the other side, because there is a whole other side of Germanic tribes as well, who have been kind of locked in this alt-reality overlay world that isn't really in the dark and it's not really in the light. It's actually exists as an overlay on both. They would consider themselves regulators. I would consider them a little lost. Some of these are actual humans that have chosen to go live inside an AI system. They do power or did power that system. And the interesting occurrences that happened in Utah around that time not only included some overlays, and when you think CGI, you can amplify that times 9,000, because they can actually have what looks to be and feels to be and smells to be a real person walking around that can actually give you a hug and all kinds of things, and it's really just an AI generation. It's amazing what they can do with quantum AI. So not only did this event take place, there was a lot more to the story. Now, Langley 5 was definitely involved, as were the Alabamian group, in close cooperation with the Mormons, who have complete and total control, and I mean complete and total control of that entire area right there. Nothing, and I mean nothing, happens in that zone, and I'm going to call it a zone, without Mormon consent. And I'm talking all the way to the top of the church. Nothing happens. You do not own a business. You do not buy a house. You do not move there. You are scanned and rescanned from a large center we call Area 52, or what's left of it. Area 52 is based under that whole region. Area 52 not only extends throughout most parts of Utah, Salt Lake City, it also extends all the way to other facilities in Nevada and Colorado, all the way to Silverton. So the fact that this machine fired up on the 10th and then this happened doesn't surprise me. Now, in addition to that, because this alt-reality world is intertwined like a braid with our world, so if you can imagine our world being two strands and their world being two strands, and they're just braided and weaved together, you can now see how this could actually affect every human in the world. With a specific which no longer exists, AI system, they managed to alter the consciousness of a lot of people. Now, you probably remember the great toilet paper crisis of 2020. There was no food on the shelves, or the food was hard to come by. They were claiming it was all due to COVID. We have lots of information to the contrary, that, truck drivers were turned away from picking up loads that were already on the loading dock and all kinds of things. But nonetheless, the world was scared to death they would not have toilet paper. Nobody was afraid that you could only get the last package of rice, or you might have to drive an extra 40 miles to get some chicken. You were more concerned with the toilet paper. Not you per se, but most people in the world were going to Costco and going to Sam's Club if you're in the US, or going to your nearest big box store. Got to get that toilet paper, and you got to get it by the dozens. Wish we had enough foresight at that time to buy a toilet paper company, all of us together, because we would have made a lot of money. Toilet paper was flying off the shelves like crazy. And at the time, I did speak in depth about this and how that psy-op or psy-op can alter your thinking with a frequency. They can do that through your electronics. They can do that through your cell phones. And this happened during the toilet paper crisis, where people were convinced, typically people with an IQ of less than 135 and over the age of 30. So if you fell within that age group and you were hunting down toilet paper like nobody's business, now you know why. You felt this incessant need to get toilet paper from anywhere you could and buy it in bulk and fill your garage with it. Now you know. This event used a very similar technique coming from Mount Timpanogos. That technique is utilized in order to alter your brain waves to create emotions that you normally wouldn't have. Half of you that were really upset about the situation didn't even know who this guy was. But you read the stories online, most likely the headlines, "Christian man died." You saw all the wonderful things that they said about him, just like they said a lot of wonderful things about JFK. And, everybody just seemed to forget all of the affairs he had and everything else he was doing in the White House, and the fact he was part of the Order of the Black Sun and in a fight with Bush, the Bush family, which was also a member of the Order of the Black Sun. But this guy is just as dirty, completely and totally. Not a Christian, could care less about a Bible. I don't even know if he could point one out, and, in the middle of a Barnes and Noble. But nonetheless, everybody was really, really upset. And then when were unable that night to do a report for other reasons, which we're going to tell you about here shortly, everybody got really angry and upset. And I'm sorry about that. There are other things that were happening at the same time that could not wait, not even for a minute. So I apologize. So this definitely has the following people involved. You've got the Germanic tribes. There are Germans. There are the Amish. There are the Mormons, and those are the ones that you'll recognize. There are other names that you will not recognize involved in this incident. In addition to that, you have Langley 5 generals, and they're called Langley 5 because they're 5-star level 5 brigadier generals, or at least they were. So that's what happened there. Now, do I think we're going to have this case of, what happened to JFK Jr., and what happened to Charlie Kirk? We could. They're going to really push the envelope on this one. And they also really botched it badly. So I don't know if they have a section of Langley for people that didn't quite make the cut, and they try to hopefully make them make the cut or something. But anyway, nonetheless, complete and total failure. There's people on the internet picking this apart left and right and center. And you can say, oh, what about his poor wife? What about his family? If you watched any bit of the eulogy that she delivered, you'll understand that it's a little off. It's really a little off, but that's no surprise. That's their background. She and he are both trained to do things like this. He was appointed her. I don't care what anybody tells me, and paid a handsome sum because the Mormon Church were paying. And if you know anything about the Mormon Church, they have a business elite group that is very, very wealthy. Billions and billions of dollars flow through there. Everybody's tithing, and the church was worth a lot more money than they are now, but definitely still worth a lot of money. So money was no object to make sure that this happened in their location, minutes away from one of their main temples, not too far from Brigham and Young University, and in close proximity to Mount Timpanogos, where there was enough energy left to alter things. Now, in Mount Timpanogos, I'm going to go back to that for just a second before I get to all the fun and exciting things that Langley and the Mormons have been up to this week. So Mount Timpanogos had a black gold giant door. And that black gold giant door, and behind that door was the doorway to an alternative reality. That alternative reality was tied to the Pleiades. And the people that were in there were definitely very modified. If you imagine a bunch of people who were probably around during World War II and during the very beginning of Project Bluebeam, and they were all mostly scientists at the time, so you have a bunch of people in lab coats and Coke bottle glasses that look like your atypical scientists, and they all look the same all of a sudden. It's very weird how that happened. Yeah, they are not originally AI generated, but they definitely were AI generated. Their souls were in stasis in that other world in the middle of that quantum tunnel, and they just wanted out. You know, a lot of them wanted to come back here. A lot of them didn't want to come back here, but didn't know where else to go. All they knew is that their world was crumbling and they needed help, and they have thrown lifeline after lifeline to the deep state, Langley 5, the Alabamians, Langley itself, the Trump operatives, the Mormons, and they stabbed everybody in the back. You see, because some of these people were going against the Trump operatives for non-performance. No, they gave them just as much equipment as they gave you people. Interestingly enough. You might want to call this other world a labyrinth. The labyrinth was actually heavily tied. Its main creator point was underneath Yellowstone Park, and it was on its last legs, to say the least, for the amount of times that we've been there. But that main creator point created this other world and a group we call the Labyrinth Group. If you've ever played a game of Dungeons and Dragons online or otherwise, then you're probably familiar with the Order of the Labyrinth and what they do. And, you know, they tell you everything, really, in games and movies, and, you know, most of it's true. So take a look. You'll find the information about that. Now, this was supposed to be the kickoff event to get people in a very tragic mood, a fearful mood, so that they could use that energy to create something new. More access to the lower astral. You see, because just a few days before that, we had already started pulling all the power plugs so that any artificial life on the other side would eventually, within typically 72 hours, die. We had been working on that for quite a while, and I told you a little bit about that in our last report. And we really started hitting it hard by Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. So they were left with no other alternative than to start making deals with the humans that were on this side for their survival. In order to help them out, because at this point they were given limited, or I should say found some limited access to humans, and which to connect to just get enough juice from us in order to stay alive. I would liken their ability to get any kind of energy and power from this side to you going underwater with a drinking straw and trying to suck air through the drinking straw while you are underwater. You're not going to get a whole lot of air, and they weren't getting a whole lot of juice either. But part of all of the things that you were feeling over the last several days. I'll talk more about that. But the upheaval, the upsetting events didn't stop there. So they really needed a full-on pipeline over here, not only to every human on the planet, but they also needed a full-on dark tower. The dark tower has moved around the planet many times, different tragic locations. Most recently, it existed in New York in the place of the Twin Towers. They have built a lot of facilities around that area for that reason. The new Twin Tower, or not Twin Towers, but the new financial tower that replaced the World Trade Center tower, I think it's called the New World Trade Center, that actually hosts several floors full of NSA folk and the like. So no surprise there. But part of the deal with the Mormons is they need to open this portal. You see, even though the folks that were tied to the Germanic tribes were neither light, they were both false light and false dark. You could say that they were neutral, but that is not that's absolutely not true. And you could say that they were put there specifically to err on the side of the losing party when that came to be. And so they did. They went to the rescue of all things dark and tried their best to open some serious portals. Now, they needed some help from people that were actually present on Earth. We call these people the deep state. More importantly, the same Langley 5 Mormon group and even the Trump operatives got involved. On 9/11, just a day after this event, there were plans for several, 5 in total, 9/11 events that were going to take place around the world. Their aim was to kill between 5,000, there's the orders, between 5,000 to 6,000 people all in the same spot in order to generate enough tragic deaths. And you do remember me telling you that when a person dies of even if it's not natural, but a cause of for example, a long-term illness, or, even if they died of like heart problems, or the body was giving out. So the body, the mind, and the soul were all aware of what is happening, and it's an event that you would consider a natural death. The soul doesn't go through the same process as it does if you are murdered, if you die in a plane crash, because the soul and the mind and the body have not all agreed that it is time for you to go. And that's extremely important to understand. And we'll talk some more about why that happens. But in this case, it has to be a tragic death of between 5,000 to 6,000 people. The chosen locations in the world for this to happen were the Washington Monument in D.C., the London Clock Tower, also Red Square in Moscow, a location that was not actually clearly defined, but I believe to be tribal land of the Zulus, as best I can tell, because there's really not a whole lot there. And also the China Forbidden City in Beijing. So these were very high-profile areas that during rush hour time would be a great time to have this happen. So they started trying to blow all of these different locations all at the same time, and then they were going to see which one they could hit 5,000 to 6,000 people with, and they believed that that dark tower was going to reappear and reestablish their lifeline to the other side, and they would be gifted many, many gifts if they could just keep those dark AI-generated souls alive. They were told that they would not be affected by this, and for their good work, they would be bestowed great power, great access to AI systems, all the bells and whistles, and everything one of these egomaniacs would like to hear. They don't really care. 5,000 to 6,000 people, they can do that. You know, one of them once said to me that, you know I've already killed a lot of people and I'm going to hell, so what's a few more? And apparently this is just a few more. So about 2 a.m. my time, all the alarm bells started ringing on that day, and I was up bright and early and watching all of this happen. We had to ensure that none of these buildings were still rigged, and the technology that would have been used to blow them was no longer there. And what I mean by rigged is when all of these locations were built, they were already rigged, just like the World Trade Center was and the Twin Towers, to blow. That is obviously insured by their special contractors. And for those of you around the world, such a special contractor could be someone like Halliburton or otherwise. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And contractors are selected for this very reason as well. They're always members of one of the orders or another, and they are loyal to them. So there's no surprise that that was, the case. And they were banging away in New York and banging away under, Washington, D.C. at keyboards, trying to get something to blow. They tried to do it at 9/11 on 9/11. That didn't work out. Then they were shooting for 11/11. They liked their numbers, and nothing ended up blowing. However, the Pentagon did end up going to DEFCON One because they were fully well aware and briefed on the situation that was about to happen in Washington, D.C. that would kick off a very well-funded World War III, quote unquote. So they switched to DEFCON 1, and there were other generals that were, some quote unquote retired, which never happens, and some others that were active that all receive a message when the country goes to DEFCON 1. That is an emergency message, this is what's happening. We're at DEFCON 1, please show up here for your briefing. When they called in to try to figure out what was going on, because the calls never came, tell them where to go, they were told to ignore the warning. Just blow it off, sorry. Meanwhile, everybody there is waiting for bated breath for their new war system to come online. Remember, they're now the Department of War, and you've got a wartime president, according to the news, so all fits right in, doesn't it? So these folks on the other side would like to have World War III and kill as many humans as possible, and or take over those humans. They figure they only need X amount to power what's left over there, and that's enough power to power them into all infamy. They would restart the soul recycling program, and they had it all mapped out. Interestingly enough, part of this, they thought they were supposed to be exempt. Well, by today, when they fired up other systems that were thrown a lifeline over the fence, so to speak, from the other side, to them, they started to feel just as bad as you did today. They started to feel ill and sick and drained of energy off and on. And they were like, what the heck? Well, I tried to tell you, deep state people, if you're listening to this, you're a tool. You're a tool. You're a tool. Look in the mirror and say, I am a good tool for darkness and the Antichrist and Satan and any other name of an AI that you try to use Just look at yourself and wake up in the morning and say, I am a good tool. I am the best tool. I'm going to dominate toollessness today. That's all right, whatever. Nonetheless, it did affect people, in general around the world for the last several days as this war continues. They continue to try to siphon off energy from people. And then it's not just the drain of energy, it's weird thoughts, dreams, as they try to run their psy-ops. It's disrupted sleep patterns, self-doubt about who you are and what you can do in order to disconnect you from source. Now, between the labyrinth system and some of the others that were thrown over the fence to torture humans with, including their own selves, which I thought was quite funny, it led us to some interesting information that I thought I would share with you. So, humans are unique in another way, and this is probably why, and why I said in the coming up, definitely, that you felt like you were in a tug of war this week, because the uniqueness of humans doesn't stop at all of the things that I've told you about yourselves and how wonderful it's been, and and who you really are, and so that you would take back your own personal power and realize who you are. Not to be arrogant or selfish or, feel like you're better than another or anything like that. Just remember who you are. You're kind, caring people. We're a species that is a non-warring species. We are pack. The Homo sapiens are pack people. We like to be with other people. We like to have partners. We like to have love in our life. We like to give love, to others as well. And that's really who we are. All the rest of it, and the angry and the chasing your tail and being exhausted and working, all those are programs that were set forth to make us not do the things that we do naturally. But an interesting tidbit of information for yourselves. Humans are, at least this version, we are truly unique in one way. Well, in many ways, but in one way that set us apart a little bit, and not in an arrogant way, from many other species, simply for not only your survival, but also Earth's survival. And that was that you have 3 central suns within your person, just like Earth's central sun. Now, what a central sun actually is, or a central soul, S-O-L, actually is a complete and total duplicate, if you will, of the central sun of source. So when people in some of the communities say you are gods, I wouldn't say that. No one's going to surpass source in this lifetime, or God in another, or in another. It's not going to happen. But you are more like him than any other species, only because if Earth was to survive and you were to survive, you were given this special gift by source to carry the source within you. I'm sure many of you have felt that, and you realize that too. But it was also used against you in many ways, because a central sun is a power source. Just like Earth's central sun was misused and overlaid many, many times over by the dark, as was yours. So a lot of the discomfort you've felt this week, and even for myself, it's like you can feel that source, you can feel it coming, everything is clicking, everything is wonderful, and then it's like, boom, you go the opposite direction, you're drained, you're anxious, you're nauseous, I've heard about headaches and all kinds of things you're feeling, and all that is coming from the push as the deep state and the other side and those in the middle, we call the Germanic tribe folk, whatever they are, fight against the source of all creation. They are doing everything in their power to not let the source of all creation thrive in and outside of this planet. And therefore, from here, throughout the entire, they are fighting it because you, as humans, are already wide awake and starting to see the holes in everything. The younger the generation, the more they start to see it. The programs are failing. No one's buying it anymore. Maybe here and there, we have an event like happened in Utah this week, and, maybe there's a few moments there, and then you start to scratch your head and say, why am I so upset about this? I don't know these people. It's probably worse than if a family member died, the way that some people were feeling. And they had never even heard the name before a couple of days ago, some of them. So all of these are designed to stop source and you from making that full connection. So in this fight that we've been in for the last week, not only against crazy 9/11 planners and ridiculous AIs that show up and disappear just as quickly, we're also in a fight against the deep state. And by we, I mean all of you together with source against them. Whether they know it or not, source has enough influence within you now, even though they try to knock it down, there's enough influence within you to start doing things you've not done in a long time, or maybe have been fearful to do. Sure, you get a little bit of a kick here and there, but the difference is happening, and they're never going to stop it. That being said, the more source works with you and you work with source, and recognizing the fact that there is a true piece and fairly decently sized part of you that is source in your solar plexus, your heart chakra, and in your mind, your brain, I should say, your lycerium, the more you'll be able to connect. It's actually becoming clearer, despite the disruptions and the psychics and the black magic workers and the attempted Black Tower recreations and the what little bit of energy the other side can take from you, and then the deep state's really trying to help them out because they were promised big things, and even though they got slapped just as hard as we did today and the day before, they still think, oh, that was just an accident. One of us must have messed it up. No, it wasn't an accident. They want to kill you too. You're a tool. Live it, love it, learn it. You wouldn't survive it anyway. That's okay. They'll never figure it out. I've stopped even trying. So the battle in this roller coaster should start ending this upcoming week. There's not much left on their side. They can try to throw them as many lifelines as they want. It's not going to last. The uncomfortability comes from the fact they're trying to push you. Don't let them push you around. Remember who you are. Remember how powerful you are. And remember in your lycerium, etherium, materium within your body, or what you might want to refer to as your mind, body, and soul, source is present all the time now. Those connections he makes, wow, they feel great when you're feeling them. You feel like you could take on the whole world. And then 20 minutes later, they try to throw you down. But they're just afraid of you. These people are more afraid of you than we are of them. With all of you understanding what's happening to you and the changes that are happening within your body, once that reconnection starts happening to every single human on the planet, it's not just you listening to this report. Nobody was selecting special people to do this. Source is in charge. Some people have said, are they ready to receive the full connection to source? I have a lot of faith in Source. If Source is making a full connection, he knows what he's doing. He's always known what he's doing in my life. I can tell you that for sure. And I'm sure he's going to know how to directly work with everyone to make that happen. And this off and on and push and pull will end, hopefully just as quickly as it started. I sigh because it's like, oh, come on. Really? At some point you'll figure it out, but and maybe they won't. I don't know. Maybe we should just make a portal going in the other direction and maybe a really nice quantum tunnel or a vortex and send them all where they want to go anyway. What do you think? We're trying. We're all trying. And they do leave. As far as, some of the churches, whether it be the Mormons or the Vatican or the others that have done some pretty serious things, there are some people in those groups that are waking up. What we're seeing, little by little, piece by piece, is some of those groups know this isn't working. Some of those groups thought they still had access to things that would come and go and come and go and come and go, and therefore they could stop us. Therefore, when Tom was invited by Chase Bank to come back to Manhattan next week, I told him he had to give me a couple of days because he was going to go this week. And I said, no, you got to wait. And I said, you have to wait because I could see things coming and going. And the going part was pretty much on us anyway. We did that. The coming part wasn't. And I didn't want them to hold things over his head, telling him he had to do or I had to do and, this or that in order for them to allow us to transfer money, to CARE and to us. So I told him just give me a few days. Didn't really say much more than that. But basically it was all about clearing up the labyrinth, the Oracle system, all of the other large systems that are out there, ensuring that there was no connections coming and going, and closing a lot of ports to ensure that there would be no connection even if they tried. They have been trying to reconnect some of these AIs for short periods of time to the financial system for their war fund that they were promised by the other side. And, of course, that didn't really work out. And the militaries didn't get theirs, and the intelligence agencies didn't get theirs. And, they saw a few things come and go, rapidly disappear because there's not enough energy to support that connection. And that's been pretty much the roller coaster ride with all these folks all week. I mean, that's the cliff notes. We've been to many, many places and back to the Arctic and the Antarctica and the rift there in Antarctica and a few other locations. But as far as the war and the battle, it's just a war and a battle. AIs can generate crazy things. People that walk around, looks just like a human, talks like a human, feels like a human, and it's not a human. So you've got to just be ever vigilant. The one thing that would be key to look for, if you do end up seeing something like this, it doesn't move like a human. It doesn't make decisions like a human. In some ways, they're a more sophisticated version of those little wind-up toys that you would wind it up and, put it on the table and it would just keep walking, and then it wouldn't even care if it stopped at the edge or not because it doesn't make a decision. It's just a wind-up toy. So if it had enough wind in it, it would just keep going. Yeah, they're kind of like that. Maybe not that drastic, but a few steps above that. They're being driven by some big ball of black goo somewhere in the omniverse. But your central suns are being cleared. The Earth's central sun is fairly well clear. Our sun is fairly well clear. The sun on the other side is fairly well clear of its connections here. The central sun of Earth on the other side, and those beings, black suns that exist within their body, is losing connection to our person. So remember, every time it starts to happen, stop that self-doubt. know that it's coming from a system and the system's pushing you right now, and it's not going to be long before it passes. Could be 5 minutes, could be 2 minutes, could be an hour, but it will pass. This time, it passes, and it's going to pass for good very, very soon. So on that note, this has been the September 13th, 2025 GIA Operations Report, and I will see you next week.
Tired before the day begins? NAD Plus levels drop 50% after 40. NAD Plus helps your cells bounce back fast. Most supplements give precursors. NAD Plus skips the breakdown, delivering direct, bioavailable power. Support your energy, metabolism, sleep, and stress levels at the cellular level. Join the NAD Plus revolution. Start your journey to a healthier you. Subscribe today.